How's my hair, darling?
Oh, it's beautiful. You have it.
For now. Yes, we are not in our motorhome at the moment, but we're thinking about motorhoming, and that's why we're making this video. Welcome back to our channel, guys. If you don't know who we are, I'm Andre.
And I'm Lisa.
And we have been traveling together since...
Forever.
2004, I think. And in 2017, we decided, well, let's just do it full time. And we've been traveling and ever since and been fully nomadic. Now, in 2018, we went to Europe and we did a short camper van trip just to get a taste for it. And then we traveled the rest of the world and COVID interjected, but we went back to Europe. We started traveling full time in our own motorhome, coming up 2 years very shortly. Now, the purpose of this video is to tell you about what we have learned. No, that's not the purpose of this video. The purpose of this video is to share with you what we spent while traveling for 1 year. So what we're doing is we actually took 2022 and we looked at all the countries we visited with our motorhome in that single year, and we drew up a massive spreadsheet, and we're going to give you an idea what it cost us.
And we're going to do a bit of a breakdown so that you can see how it compares from country to country, as well as giving you the bigger picture, what it looks like for an entire year of 365 days.
Maybe we should say up front that we are full-time travelers.
And we are not first-time travelers, so we are very budget-orientated, but we're also not the youngest of people, so we're not doing this on a shoestring.
You've got to take what you can from what we're presenting here, but keep in mind this is from a slow travel perspective. We have the luxury of time. This is a full year's worth of travel, and if you're going to do a 3-week or 4-week or 2-week motorhome trip, you might do it a little bit differently. You might spend more on going out for dinners and lunches and going more excursions and activities, but this will still give you a good idea of what to expect considering the way we travel. Now, if you don't know how we travel, we got possibly hundreds of videos we published in the last 2 years in Europe alone. So go check our channel. You'll find weekly and sometimes bi-weekly videos we've uploaded.
And make sure to click the subscribe button to come along with us, because we are returning to Europe, we're returning to our motorhome Millie, and we've got some exciting adventures planned for the year ahead.
Okay, before Lisa's going to give us a quick rundown of the countries we were in, we're pretty much going to break down this budget discussion into the major components relevant to everybody. You should now keep in mind we own our own motorhome, so the cost of ownership is completely out of this discussion, as is the cost of maintenance, insurance, and medical insurance, travel insurance. What else did I forget?
If you're more interested in those kind of things, we are going to be doing a Q&A video as to how we live our nomadic life, some of our challenges, and how we deal with these things.
Yeah, that'll be in an upcoming video. So this budget primarily will look at how long did we spend in a certain country, what did it cost us if we paid for accommodation, what did we spend on food, what did we spend on fuel, and we'll give you an idea of a rough cost or fuel cost average. What, did I miss something?
Cellphone, sightseeing, I think that's it.
All right. So let's talk about the countries we were in briefly, and we'll put up a map and show you our little route. January, we were still busy doing a house sit near Malaga in Spain.
From there we left and we went along the southern coast of Spain, heading towards Portugal. We went all the way around the coast of Portugal, making it almost to the north, where we then cut back into Spain, traveled along the northern coast of Spain and France in a little bit of a hurry. We went through Belgium, Luxembourg, into Germany, and we're making our way to Scandinavia, hitting Denmark, Sweden and Norway. We didn't quite go as far north as we'd hoped, and from there we headed back into Denmark, which we absolutely loved, made our way through Germany once again, and all the way down to the south of Italy.
On that Denmark topic, one of our next soon videos will be like a deep dive into Denmark, because we spent quite a bit of time in Denmark and we think it's an absolute hidden gem.
And I want to say we'll be going back to Denmark very soon.
Keep in mind, this is a 12-month stint we're talking about, and we only did about 13,000 kilometers, just to give you an idea. So we do not move that quickly, but it's still a fair distance, and everything is seasonal. So Unfortunately, if you're in Europe, you only have so much time to make the most of that season, and if you plan, you have to plan smartly so you don't get caught up in the peak of summer throng.
As well as not the peak of winter, because we do not like the cold. All right, I think let's dive into it.
The easiest is going to be if I put this whole sheet up here, boom, and you're going to see all these countries. And what we're going to do is we're not going to discuss every single country in detail. We'll point out sort of the differences, the anomalies, why there's differences, what's cheapest, what's more expensive, and what our opinions are around it. For most of these countries, we actually have separate videos as well.
So we visited a total of 14 countries in the 12-month period. And as you can see, some of the countries are very small. I mean, places like Gibraltar, Luxembourg, Lichtenstein.
Gibraltar is not a country.
Well, it's not the EU.
We visited a total of 13 countries.
Plus Gibraltar.
Gibraltar doesn't count. But we did go into Gibraltar.
Some of them you can see, San Marino as well, are very small countries, so we only spent 1 or 2 days there perhaps. And the bigger countries, we generally spent at least a month in these countries. Sometimes it was broken up into 2 stints. So for instance, Spain, we spent some time in the south, and then again we returned to some time in the north. And then Germany, being the biggest, or being a giant country in Europe, we had to traverse twice.
Not even roughly. The countries we spent the most time in was obviously Italy, and that was sort of towards the end of summer, where we spent almost 3 months in Italy. We were actually on our way towards Sicily, but our plans changed a bit, and now in South Africa, but more on that later. And then the countries that stand out is the Scandinavian countries, like Denmark. We spent more than a month. Germany is a bit of an anomaly because we actually traversed through Germany towards Scandinavia.
And we visited some friends there, so we spent some time with them.
So even though we spent 30 days in Germany, it feels like we really barely scratched the surface of Germany.
On that topic, I was actually surprised by Germany. We enjoyed it a lot more than we expected to, and I think that that's also an underrated country when it comes to van life. Decent infrastructure for motorhoming, and there's a lot to see in a country of that size.
Okay, so let's really talk about accommodation. And you guys can see on the list, I'll put it up, how many nights we've actually spent in each country. I'm not going to go through that. What you should pay attention to is how many of those nights we actually paid for accommodation. Now, some countries make it a lot easier to visit without paying for accommodation. Now, if you don't quite understand how you do it without paying for accommodation, you should refer back to our videos on Spain and Portugal about what the difference is between parking and camping.
Maybe what we can do is we can just say that there's obviously various options if you're traveling with a motorhome or a van. Obviously, your first option is to stay in a campsite. Now, this we do less and less the more we live full-time in our motorhome. At a campsite, you'll have facilities like bathrooms, you'll have electricity, water, and usually some sort of activity. If you're traveling with kids, there might be a playground, a swimming pool, might have access to a lake, that kind of thing. Secondly, there are, in Italy, they call them area sostas.
Well, it's like a dedicated motorhome site. It's almost like a mini campsite vibe. So you might have some of those facilities like shared ablutions, you will have servicing facilities for your vehicle, and you may or may not have electricity as an optional extra.
I was going to say maybe the best example is actually France, where you have a lot of these airs which are made for motorhomes, but they don't have, it's not a holiday place. It's a place where you can stop. It's dedicated for camper vans, but it's very simple.
But you also get more expanded versions, particularly in areas like Spain and Portugal, where it is like a little campsite. You're allowed to display camping behavior.
Put out your chairs, open your awning, things like that.
Where a lot of the municipal supplied facilities are generally considered to be parkings. And that's a little bit different.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got the absolutely free, or not always free, sometimes it is also paid, but it's literally just a parking area where you park your vehicle and you overnight there.
We tend to stick to designated parking spaces simply because there are some rules and regulations as to where you're allowed to overnight in your vehicle. Some countries are a little bit more clearly defined, but we haven't run into a problem yet. But we also pay attention to restrictions. If you look at the list, you'll see that some countries have a much higher rate of paid accommodation. I think we can point out to Sweden as a good example. Now, we paid for accommodation in Sweden a lot because we were there sort of during the peak of summer, and we found that the marina parkings and the harbors actually offered fantastic value in a very busy time of the year.
Yeah.
So for under 20 euros generally, you get a parking right on the water with access to ablutions, servicing for your vehicle,
Sometimes even laundry.
Sometimes even laundry, electricity, and especially in the south of Sweden, we quite liked it because there was good kitesurfing conditions, there were some nice beaches. And unfortunately, it was a little bit more tricky to find these free parkings with a motorhome that time of the year in Sweden.
And that's also because we stayed sort of in the southern half of Sweden. I think the further north you go in Scandinavia, obviously the more wild camping there will be.
Oh, yes. Of course.
And the less busy it will be. As a total of the whole year, you can see that we only paid for 86 nights accommodation.
That's right. Out of 365 and 124 different
locations
spots we slept at, so that's quite an interesting ratio. The other ones we can point at maybe is when it was sort of a holiday season, like we wanted to go to visit Porto and it was over Easter. Although there were options for like free parking, we didn't feel quite comfortable with it, and we wanted to be able to leave our motorhome and cycle into the town. So we go to a little campsite and you pay a little more for that. But on average, I think we should mention Portugal offers fantastic value in terms of paid camp spots.
I was just about to say that. It's one of the countries that we actually stayed a high percentage of the time in campsites, and yet the cost relatively was really low.
And if you cast your eyes on the average cost paid per night, now this is just for the paid nights, you can quite clearly see this pattern. The most expensive on average is
really your Luxembourg and Belgium.
France. You can get plenty of free airs, but even the paid Sostas or airs, or even the camping car park, which we quite like.
We use them very often, and there you're looking at an average. I mean, in France, here it says 14.50, but the paid ones, must have been. Oh, that one went up because we spent a week in Paris at a campsite. So if you look at just the airs in France, you're looking at around 12 to 13 euro, and then the campsite pulled that up slightly.
Maybe worth mentioning, yes, we did spend a week in Paris, and we actually used Axi rates to get a campsite. A very nice camp actually for 7 days, I think.
Yes.
And we commuted in with the train, and it was super convenient. I think it was like 20 minutes, maybe
less, so just under 20.
So that did bring the cost for France, and you can see as we go through this list, the France cost is a little bit higher because of the visit to Paris.
You can also get a good idea of the distances that we traveled per country. So you can see, for instance, Spain, that we traversed along the south and the north coast. You're looking at almost 2,000 kilometers. Portugal is such a small country relatively. We spent a month there. We traveled all along the coast, but we traveled very slowly, so it was only just over 1,000 kilometers.
Our journey started in the south of Spain.
Yes.
Okay, so we were already in Spain when that year started, so we didn't count the section we did the previous year.
It's a giant country to actually be able to get across, and the same for France. This is only going along the north coast.
So I think what stands out there
is Germany is huge. To get
huge.
Across Germany, just the kilometers absolutely rack up.
So a quick tip: if you travel through Germany, there's no toll fees in Germany if you're under 3.5 tons. Might actually be bigger. And roads are great. Road works are horrendous. If you want to avoid the trucks, travel on Sundays because no trucks are allowed on the main motorways on Sundays. So average cost. Now let's quickly talk about fuel. You can see there's a interesting disparity in the fuel prices. 2022 was an interesting year for fuel, generally speaking. And as we started our trip, it was before the energy crisis emerged due to the conflict in Ukraine. And we were able to still get fuel in Spain, I think back then for about €1.30 a litre, just to give you an idea.
And when we returned into Spain, it was about $1.80 a litre. So the prices that we've shown here are actually an average of the prices that we paid when we filled up. So they're not all at the same time.
No.
So one should just keep that in mind.
The prices do fluctuate. We were in Italy for 3 months and it fluctuated, it swung both ways by 10-15% within a week, maybe even. But it does give you an idea. You can see quite clearly countries like the Scandinavian countries are markedly more expensive. Also Germany and Spain, we found there was a good subsidy at the moment. I think in Italy there's currently a subsidy as well.
So it just gives you a good idea of the price of fuel, the distance we traveled, and how that actually sums up for a year in travel doing roughly 13,000 kilometers.
So our biggest expense by far,
and if you've watched our videos, you might already know this,
is food. And we're going to quickly touch on food. And once again, keep in mind, we Depending on the destination, we may or may not indulge on local delicacies. We don't really eat out a lot because it's a full-time lifestyle for us. Firstly, it can add up very quickly. If you prepare to spend €4 or €5 on a drink every day, it just becomes unaffordable. We still spend a big majority of our budget probably on food.
Yes, and we'll give you a little bit of a breakdown of our food expenses as well. But what we should say is that predominantly we prepare our own meals in our van. It's really on the odd occasion that we go out and we actually sit in a restaurant. And then we also obviously took into account that we were going to be going to the more expensive Scandinavian countries. And this is reflected in our food budget here. So perhaps we can just quickly run through it. So we started in Spain, and the daily expenditure there is a good reflection of what food costs in Spain. The only one that you'll see on the list here that is cheaper than Spain is Norway, which is not really true. The fact is that we stocked up for Norway, so we had supplies, and that's why we spent less in Norway.
I think you can probably discard the Norway number because we ran into mechanical difficulties, so we were sort of stuck in a parking lot for a while, and we actually had very little options.
We had free electricity, and so we made pizza most nights, and that's how we managed to keep our costs down in Norway. So this is the thing. Norway is an expensive country, but if you can go in there prepared, stocked up, then you don't need to spend a lot on food in a country like that.
We didn't buy any alcohol in the Scandinavian countries. I think Denmark, we might have had a beer or two, but that was pretty much it. Although the average price for food looks similar to the other countries, there's a few things we either bought ahead, like Germany. In our opinion, just looking at Germany is actually quite an affordable destination overall. One of the countries with the best value when it comes to food and alcohol, for sure.
And that is why we should point out that the value here for food for Germany is not really representative, because the reason why it's so high is that we bought so much there. We went through Germany twice. So we stocked up in Germany on our way to Scandinavia, and then we did the same coming down because Germany is also a lot cheaper than Italy. So we stocked up once again with a bit of alcohol as well as a few other odds and ends.
One thing to point out, everybody says, oh, you think Spain is cheap, wait till you get to Portugal. In our opinion, maybe not so much. A few things maybe you'll find cheaper in Portugal. We find, generally speaking, like paid camping or paid parking is cheaper in Portugal than in Spain. Food,
the problem
it's the same.
Portugal is that you eat too many pastel de natas.
I would argue that maybe dining out is marginally cheaper in Portugal than Spain, if we compare the two. But on average, we found Spain and Portugal to be very similar in many ways. Interesting is, though, that I think Spain's fuel is quite a bit cheaper.
In summary, when it comes to food, this gives you a good indication, with the exception of Norway and Germany, where Norway this is probably underestimate, and Germany, it's definitely an overestimate because we were stocking up.
We don't all travel the same way, but I can assure you we don't eat instant noodles.
And just to give you an indication of the breakdown of our food, we really generally cook for ourselves. So our groceries category is 77.5% of our food expenditure. The amount of times that we actually go out and eat out is really small at only 7.4%. And then even though we do cook for ourselves and things like that, we still do have a drink. So we do spend some on alcohol. And sadly, our category of chocolate and gelato is actually very, very small, sitting at only 2%.
That's not an insignificant amount on chocolate, though.
No. And not an insignificant amount of alcohol either. So we do enjoy ourselves when we travel.
Okay, let's wrap this up quickly before we get to the conclusion. And last thing everybody wonders about is Cellphone and Data, and that is an ongoing struggle. So if you look at our sheet, you'll see usually we can plan for around €1 a day, maybe even less. So what we do is we each have a SIM, an Italian SIM, which is actually quite cost effective, which gives us decent roaming across the EU, but very limited data. So we keep those guys alive. They generally cost about €6 a month.
6 to 8, depending on
€6 to
where we are.
€8 a month. What we did in Spain was we got a local SIM card. Normally you can get around 35 gig for €20. Portugal is a bit cheaper. There you can get unlimited data for €1 a day.
I think that's the one country that really stands out when it comes to good value and ease of getting data.
And then France, actually what we loved in France is something we learned in the previous trip was to get one of the free mobile SIMs. Because in France itself, for around 20 euros a month, it gives you virtually unlimited data. It's not quite unlimited, it's like 220 gigs, I think, per month. But for us, that's massive amounts. And the bonus is that SIM will roam across the EU and will give you 25 gigs
for 20 euros.
For 20 euros worth for roaming data. So what we decided to do is, rather than struggle to find SIM cards in Germany, Belgium, and across Scandinavia, where it's actually quite expensive, we opted to keep our free mobile SIM active from France and just use that for. We were obviously forced to seek out some free Wi-Fi hotspots to make up for the difference. And also in Scandinavia, especially at the marina parkings, we actually found a lot of useful
That was
Wi-Fi.
another reason actually that we went to those marina parkings in Sweden.
So we just quickly look at the numbers, put them all together, see what the averages are, and then we'll maybe do a conclusion and final thoughts.
If you take a look at the averages per day, you can see that it's anywhere from as little as 25 euro per day in Spain, which stands out as a fairly cheap place. And that's really because it's so easy to stay there without paying for accommodation, and food is cheap.
Sure.
Whereas it goes as high as 50 euro or even 55 in France. In France, we spent a week in Paris at a campsite, and of course the pastries in France are incredible, so we also end up spending a little bit too much on food. Certain countries which are expensive, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Luxembourg, I think those stand out as the more expensive of the European countries, with Spain, Portugal being cheaper and Italy not being that cheap. Also, once again, because I think we eat too well and too much in Italy. In summary, I think what you can take from this budget is the following. If you look at our breakdown of our total expenses for travel and our camper trip, you can see that we spent almost 60% of our expenditure on food. So food is a large component, and you can see that the average is just over 20 euro per day. And I think this is a good indication if you are prepared to pretty much cook for yourself all the time.
If you got things like luxuries like alcohol or dining out, maybe you can actually shave quite a lot off this. But let's be honest, we also travel to enjoy local food. And even though we don't dine out all the time, we do like to take advantage of being in a different country and experiencing those local variety.
This is also where you have the most flexibility. It's a place that's easy to cut if you want to spend less, but it's also the category that's easiest to spend on if you like to dine out and have luxury. So it's the most flexible depending on who you are and what kind of traveler you are. Then secondly is the category of transport. Now you can see we spent almost 24% on transport. This includes fuel, tolls, public transport, everything travel related, transport related, other than the actual cost of the vehicle. Now, this must be seen in context of how slow we travel. So only to 13,000 kilometers in a whole year.
This is a category where you can also make a saving. The longer you stay in a place, the less you move, and the cheaper it gets. Okay.
Then accommodation, you can see that on average, because we actually paid for accommodation so few times over the year, our accommodation cost is less than 10% of our total expenditure. So if you're the kind of person who wants to go and stay at campsites, you need to add a significant amount to this budget. And if you're the kind of person who just wants to stealth camp for free, then there's a little bit that you can save on this.
There's a lot to be saved. You don't really have to pay for accommodation at all. But once again, if you visit major locations like cities, sometimes it's a bit more tricky, or you would prefer some peace of mind leaving your vehicle. Last categories, which is actually a very small percentage, is made up by your Cellphone Data, which we spend 435 euros for the year on Cellphone Data. And that's just over €1 per day on average. Then obviously LPG, which is we use quite extensively in our van. Our fridges run off LPG, we cook off it, and our heating works off it. But even so, because we have a refillable system, it's pretty economical and comes in well under €1 per day on average. Then an even almost more insignificant category, sadly or not, no, surprisingly maybe, is sightseeing, because there's actually so much to see and do without having to pay for excursions. and as well as laundry, which is a close second to sightseeing.
And that being said, I mean, there are some expensive sightseeing trips which we did. We did some incredible experiences like our Porto Bridge climb. If you haven't seen us do that, be sure to click on that video. But there's so much to do for free in Europe.
Yeah, I mean, we tend to gravitate towards warmer destinations. We do like the ocean. We like to be outside. We spend a lot of time in nature. And there's plenty of that, especially during the good weather months.
In summary, as you can see, our average daily expenditure is €35.50, which is really very low in the fact that you must just realize that that does basically exclude any accommodation cost.
To share the perspective, spending €13,000 for a year on these categories seems pretty affordable. I think it's pretty affordable. You have to remember that it's not a reflection of all our expenses. For example, our medical insurance, our camper van insurance, our maintenance on our motorhome, our personal insurance. Then there's also categories like clothing, sporting equipment. We have bicycles, we have kite surfing equipment, we have subs, and of course electronics. We have cameras, we have laptops. So there's a big chunk of that that's not part of this, but we wanted to try and keep it as relevant to these countries in terms of traveling expenses by motorhome as possible.
There are certain countries in Europe which are significantly cheaper than others, but if you have the burning desire to go and visit one of the more expensive countries, there are economical ways to go and do it, and traveling by motorhome is most definitely one of those ways. If you're planning on spending a much longer period of time in a country, then yes, you can save significantly by being in one of the cheaper countries.
And we are the first people who will tell you that just because we went to 13 countries, according to Lisa, 14 in 12 months, that now we've seen it all. We haven't even scratched the surface of any of these countries. And that's what makes motorhome travel so amazing. So it takes you to places where you probably normally would not go. And it affords you the luxury of taking it slowly, enjoying what you see around you, and just generally having a more, I think, fulfilling experience.
And what this year's worth of experience in traveling these countries has taught us is that, firstly, in the next year, we want to go and see some new countries. We want to travel in a slightly different direction to see possibly a little bit more of Eastern Europe. But at the same time, we want to return to all of these countries to be able to see more of them and experience.
You guys interested? Keep following us. We are heading back to Italy very soon from South Africa, and then we're going to cross over probably Albania, then Greece. We're going to make our way up through some of the Balkan countries and hopefully make our way all the way through to Denmark again, after which we'll go all the way south to Spain again. So there's a lot of interesting things coming up, which we're really excited about this year.
And then maybe even returning to Africa in a whole different way.
If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. And we are hoping that you guys found some use and value in this discussion, and I'm sure we'll do this again next year.
So tell us how these numbers compare with yours, or if you're in the planning stages, let us know what you've got planned for the future. And thanks for watching and traveling along.
As always, thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Why did you forget about it?
You're Ollie.